everyone and welcome back to my channel. Let me guess. You want an off-grid solar setup but you don't know where to start. Well, you've come to the right place because in this video I'll be talking you through all the different components that you need to build a solar setup that suits your needs. But before we get started, I just want to make sure that you understand that I don't remain liable for any risks associated with this content. It's only intended for demonstrational purposes, meaning if you decide to replicate this content, you do so at your own risk. Now, having that being said, let's get started. Speaking from experience, I probably shouldn't be the one saying this, but before buying all the solar gear, it's important to sit back and plan your solar setup before installing it. Reason being, you don't want to end up in my shoes, where you've accidentally invested so much money on a great solar setup, but it's just not scaled properly for your needs. So to avoid that classic scenario, you want to begin by asking yourself a series of questions that will really help you determine what sort of products you're after. So the first product I'll be buying in a solar setup would typically be the inverter. To determine the size of inverter that you're after, you want to ask yourself questions like, what products will I be running? How much power will I be using at one point in time? You can even ask yourself more specific questions like, what is the input voltage of the inverter? So will I be having a 12 volt solar setup, a 24 volt solar setup, or even something else? For example, you plan on running 3 floodlights which are 100 watts each. You also want to charge your phone, watch and laptop watts, maybe watching some TV. Say another 1000 watts. Now that comes to a total of 2300 watts. Now, of course, you want to drink that hot cup of coffee in the morning, which will be another 2000 watts for the coffee machine. That comes to a total of 4300 watts. Okay, to put that into perspective, the average reliable inverter I could find online for anything near that wattage rating was $1,400. Just for your reference, even at that price, we wouldn't be able to run all of our appliances. Or would we? So basically, inverters come with 2 standard wattage ratings. These wattage ratings are known as continuous and surge. The lower wattage rating is known as the continuous wattage rating, and that tells you the maximum load you can draw from your inverter indefinitely, whilst the higher wattage rating is the surge wattage rating, and that tells you the maximum amount of power you can draw from your inverter for a brief period of time. That brief period of time will vary depending on your inverter, but it can be found between the title on the front of the inverter or on the specifications, which are often located on the back or in the instruction manual. Alright, so now we have the inverter. Next you want to be identifying your battery capacity, and that's determined by adding up all the watt hours that you'll be using throughout the day. For example, you're running a fridge which takes a consistent 100 watts on average. You need a battery that's capable of running it 24/7. You can either go for a sealed lead acid battery, an absorbed glass mat battery, or a lithium battery. Now, a very common and yet efficient type of lithium battery is known as lithium iron phosphate, also known as LiFePO4. If you ever do come across these batteries, I highly recommend. Sealed lead acid and absorbed glass mat batteries are significantly cheaper compared to lithium batteries, and I mean like half the price cheaper. Unfortunately, lots of people are going to see this and they're going to go 100 amp hour sealed lead acid, 100 amp hour lithium, bam, I'm going to go for the sealed lead acid battery because the specifications are the exact same and it's a lot cheaper. No, well, don't you dare go for the sealed lead acid battery because you're going to regret it, and I'm going to show you why. The main reason sealed lead acid batteries are significantly cheaper is because they technically have half the capacity of their actual rating. In other words, if you have a 100 amp hour sealed lead acid battery, you technically have 50 usable amp hours from that. Reason being, depending on your battery, there's usually a 50% DOD you have to factor in for. Now, DOD abbreviates for depth of discharge, and that refers to the amount of power you can draw from your battery without effectively shortening its lifespan from physical or chemical damage. This is in fact the exact opposite for lithium batteries. Lithium batteries come with something called a battery management system, aka BMS. The BMS is technically a motherboard enclosed inside the battery box itself that is programmed to protect your battery from extreme temperatures, reverse polarity, and short circuiting. So if you ever see a 100 amp hour sealed lead acid battery for $400 and a 100 amp hour lithium battery for $800, you know which one to choose. So in the end, the BMS of a lithium battery, or at least having fuses or circuit breakers wherever possible, is essential for protecting everything that you are running in your system. If you end up going for a 12 volt solar setup, you're going to find that it is a lot easier to find replacement parts since 12 volt solar setups are more popular and abundant. If you end up going for a 24 volt solar setup, you're going to find that your cabling is a lot more efficient because of the fact that you're going to get less voltage drop, and you can also save a lot of money because naturally you'll be buying a thinner gauge wire. Please also be aware that the voltage of your battery and inverter must be the same in order for your system to work. Now that you know what type of battery you want, you need to figure out how much usable watt hours you need in your setup to determine the battery capacity. Please note that your battery capacity is primarily dependent on what you're running at night, since during the day you're charging your battery from solar rather than taking power from it. So what exactly does that mean? Well, basically, if you're consuming 1000 watt hours during the entire span of nighttime, using the voltage times amperage equals wattage formula, we can rearrange it to find 1000 divided by 12, which equates to 83.33 amp hours at 12 volts. So you would be looking at buying an 83 amp hour battery at 12 volts, or a 42 amp hour battery at 24 volts. As always, leave some wiggle room for battery capacity because substantial energy is lost as heat, and voltage drop across lengths of wire. Now, what I'm about to say may confuse some people, so please feel free to pause the video at any point to take notes or ask any outstanding questions in the comments below. After determining the voltage and capacity of your battery, you need to figure out how much sunlight you're getting in a single day to determine the size of your solar panels. Now, the voltage of your solar panel and battery must be the same in order for your setup to work. But this comes with a few exceptions. Now, one of these exceptions would be when charging a 24 volt battery with two 12 volt panels. You can achieve this by wiring up two panels in what's called a series connection to achieve 24 volts at the same amperage. If you were to wire up the panels in a parallel connection, you would double the amperage whilst essentially maintaining the same voltage. A very practical example of this is when charging a completely depleted 24 volt 50 amp hour battery every single day, and you're getting, say, an average of 5 solid hours of sunlight per day. You will need to multiply the voltage by amperage to get your watt hours. So in this case we have a total of 1200 watt hours. 1200 divided by the amount of sunlight you're getting, which in this case is 5 hours, that equates to 240 watts. So that basically tells us that if you were to charge your battery in 5 hours, you need at least 240 watts per hour to achieve that. So using what we discussed before tells us that we can either get 240 watts worth of 12 volt panels and wire them all up in series, or get 240 watts worth of 24 volt panels and wire them up all in parallel. Either way is going to work, but it all just depends on the voltage of your battery. Finally, after getting everything, you will need a solid charge controller to regulate the flow of current going from your solar panels into your battery. The idea of having a solid charge controller is that it will adjust the amount of voltage and current going to your battery so you don't permanently damage your battery. Let me show you what I mean. This panel I was posing with at the beginning of the video says 12 volts on it. In fact, it is rated for 12 volts. But the fascinating thing is that if you look closely at the maximum voltage during peak sunlight of the solar panel, it's 19.8 volts. To put that into perspective, every battery that you wire up into that panel during peak sunlight will blow, if not permanently damage your battery. So make sure you have a good quality solid charge controller to avoid that situation. There are two main types of solid charge controllers. One is known as PWM, which stands for pulse width modulation. The other is known as MPPT, which uses an advanced technology called maximum power point tracking to charge your batteries. MPPT solid charge controllers can be found at double or even triple the price of PWM ones. And there is a very good reason for this. Now, MPPT solid charge controllers will charge your batteries at an average rate of 40% more than PWM. In case you're a solar expert, you will know that that is insanely faster. In case you don't know what that means, two people with the exact same solar setup as each other, but one person using a PWM and the other person is using an MPPT solar charge controller, the person with the MPPT charge controller can charge the same size battery with almost half the available sunlight, as someone who has to wait almost double the amount of time with a PWM. That is a big difference. Either way you go, you need to scale your solar charge controller based on the amount of sunlight that you're getting from your solar panels. And as always, leave some wiggle room. For example, if I had a 100 watt 12 volt panel, using the formula to 2 decimal places, I have around 8.33 amps. So by leaving some wiggle room, I would be going for a 10 amp solar charge controller. Finally, for all the appliances that we need to generate and regulate and use the power that we're harnessing from the sun, we've scaled all but one thing. And that one thing, of course, is the cabling that we need to connect everything together. Who would have thought? The cabling that you get may be sold in terms of millimeters squared or American wire gauge, or even by the amount of cable strands that you get inside of your cabling. Now, whichever metric you're given to work with, you must convert it into a corresponding current rating in order to buy the right cabling that you need. As always, you got it, leave some wiggle room. Now, you want to particularly leave some wiggle room with your cabling because, first of all, some of the appliances that you run, such as the inverter, might have a surge. Now, if you didn't scale your cabling properly, then at least you might have a hot barbecue. Good luck. Second of all, if you're running your cabling over long distances, the less current your cabling can handle, the more voltage drop you're going to get. So to compensate this, professional electricians often either increase the voltage to maintain a relatively low level of resistance, or in the contrary, maintain the voltage but increase the wire size, which can be very costly over lengths of wire. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped you decide what's best for you, and if you're interested or you learned something new, then please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.